What's up, people? Today I want to talk a little bit about your essence versus your ego. Essentially another video talking about, I suppose you could call it duality, the same way you get hot and cold, heaven and hell, good and bad, whatever the piece of the number two that you want to kind of go about, right? On the, I guess you could say, spectrum. You know, sometimes we get a lot of extremes, sometimes we get quite a middle ground, and that's what this video is going to be about. So, are your day-to-day habits and what you're kind of striving for in life, does it feed your essence or does it feed your ego? And what is the essence and what is the ego? And of course, I suppose you could say these are the two ends of each extreme, on the left and the right, where if you lean too much towards one side, your life could be quite chaotic. And sometimes when you lean so far into one side, it starts to become problematic because you're going to find it even more harder to find balance again. But when you step towards, I suppose, an extra piece of wisdom, that could get you back on your tracks. So, the ego. Everyone likes to talk about it like it's some devil or like some really, really bad thing that you kind of got to get rid of and escape it, and I don't think that's entirely possible, especially because your ego is the primary responsible for your energy, your day-to-day levels of how productive you are and what you're striving for, and everyone has it. It's not like we can't throw it away, because then life might be seen as pointless. You know, we're all trying to fill in some kind of void somehow, and so this is where the ego is best. However, because it's quite uncomfortable to kind of face it and understand what it can potentially do and the power it has, it can be seen as quite scary, because it can really make or break you, depending on what side of the extreme you can go on. And then you've got your essence. This is, I suppose, some people refer this to as the soul, your spirit, your subconscious, maybe unconscious, and there's probably 50 other names for it, but I'm going to call it essence for the sake of this video. I think essence sounds kind of cool. It's got that mystical kind of sound to it. But essentially this is more so the kind of higher nature that you would have. You know, things that make you feel like you're more than just an animal or more than just your ego. Maybe higher aspirations, maybe things like questioning existence outside of Earth and your earthly experience. Someone actually, I remember a really good quote, and it was ego stands for Earth Guide Only. And I was like, that's pretty cool, because it's kind of true. And so your essence is going to be outside of that. Your thinking patterns, your emotions, your things that aren't really necessarily tangible, and I guess what some people would call heaven, the heavenly experience on Earth, for example. But then again, when you kind of come more towards that side, you know, it can really mess you up as well, because you can start to see the world as this quote-unquote matrix where you gotta escape it and everything is against you. And you'd be very surprised, a lot of people who kind of go down that route, because they try to force the nature of it, they eventually just start to get crazy. And it's I don't think it's meant to be. I don't think any journey is meant to drive you crazy. I think it's meant to flow naturally, but people are curious, and so they follow that path, which is to be expected. But again, the results are also to be expected as well. But on a more practical level, just because it's easier to explain this stuff on a much more practical level, because it affects every single one of us on a practical level. You know, we're not going to extremes and all that stuff, because I don't like to talk too much about that stuff, because it's not very productive. It sounds crazy and all that stuff, but it's just not productive to kind of take away from the video. So let's try to dissect this a little bit. Your essence is your authentic self, who you truly are underneath all that is that you show to the world. It's where growth lies. It's where genuine connection is. And it's with something that no amount of money can possibly buy, and that's inner fulfillment. That kind of detachment from the world in a sense, but also the fact that you're enjoying the human experience that you have. Now, that's not to say that the waves in your mind are never going to be at turmoil, or you're never going to get stressed, but you know it's part of the experience, the ups and downs of life, and you're still going to be fulfilled. Not only that, but you're going to be following a path that is very, very rewarding to you, and is based on your interests rather than what someone else wants to say. And a very, very prime example that a lot of you may face on this is the whole concept of, at least for the newer generation, of higher education. For a lot of people, especially when they come out of school, they kind of just get sent to college or university, higher education, without thinking too much of it, and then they end up regretting it after. At least that's how it is where I'm from. This isn't leading your life with your essence. This is leading your life with your ego. The external validation from other people. The kind of proving your worth to maybe your parents or even your peers, because if everyone else is doing it, why wouldn't I? It's places where you avoid discomfort and you're always constantly comparing yourself. And so you might be saying, we live in a very, very ego-driven world, which is quite true. At least on the surface it is. Online it is, because social media is quite literally built for media that is for everyone. And it's very ego-driven anyway, because the whole metric system of likes, views, all that stuff it's all numbers on a screen. And so it satisfies your ego. And in some cases, your essence too. Obviously it depends on, again, the path that you choose if you are doing that. So it all does depend, right? Obviously you're going to have a need to do both things, especially when you're trying to succeed in things, because you're trying to do things on a very practical level. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you kind of want to have that balance, right? Because again, if you go too much towards your authentic self and stuff like that, say for example you're in business, you're not going to be able to appeal to any customer apart from just your needs. And the whole premise of running a successful business is to understand your audience, which is tied to the ego, which is tied to external validation. And like, I can actually give a really good example, not in business, but just like with the gym, for example. If you didn't know, I actually wanted to start making gym videos instead of what I do right now. And in gym culture, typically, a lot of people will work out for appearance, but just directly for appearance. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's to demonstrate the pinnacle of what a human being can achieve. But that's also very, very ego-driven. The whole competition is also entirely within external validation. So ego isn't the problem here, right? There's also a genuine connection to improve and to show people that you can strive for more and do more. But at the same time, there's no culture in terms of how to move your body very joyfully and practice the ability to be able to function in various scenarios. And so your muscles can get stiff and your joints can get stiff over time because, you know, you're too much in the ego, which is why sometimes you need to operate more so with what you really want to do in the gym. And that's not just training for a certain look, but also to kind of be able to perform or, you know, increase your endurance, or, you know, like not skip your cardio. Like, it's a pretty common thing to skip your cardio in the gym, but it's like your authentic self would probably want you to do it, so why not just do it? You know, little things like that. I've given like 3 examples, so I hope it's decently clear, you know what I'm saying? So dig into your life, how you might be doing things in your own personal life. You know, maybe you are on the extreme side of ego. Maybe it comes from your childhood. Maybe even little things like people pleasing, if you're that kind of person. Could be like you seeking the love that you never received as a child on an emotional level. You know, you've got things like, if you're like a workaholic, maybe, you know, you're trying to avoid your feelings and you're trying to block it off with productivity. And, you know, that hustle culture mindset kind of starts to set in. You know, you've got like procrastination because You might be trying to protect yourself from perfectionism. Like there's a lot that is like to be unpacked in all of us, man. Like it's crazy, but it's wonderful. And like I said, when you try to start to operate as much as you can towards the middle line of essence and ego, which also can mean two things, by the way. It can mean either you go through these cycles where you're following your essence way more than your ego, and then you might also swing to the other side where the extremes, because some lessons are to be learned in that way. Or you can also do it in a middle ground where you're making slow incremental changes from both sides, and that's perfectly fine. It's a part of the human experience. So try to explore yourself, try to bring yourself into the balance between essence and ego. As always, peace and blessings be to you all. Let me know if you have any suggestions, any like problems you might be facing in your day-to-day life. Maybe I can make a video on it. Take care.